Hello and welcome to our holiday edition of Book Buzz. My name is Giovanna and this is my colleague,
Lisa Regano.
And we're going to discuss 4 books that are coming out in 2020 that we think you will find interesting. Lisa?
Okay.
Take it away.
Okay. So, in the first book I'm going to discuss, the first one is called Dear Edward, and it's by Ann Napolitano, and it is due out January 6th. Now, in Dear Edward, 12-year-old Edward Adler is the sole survivor of a plane crash that takes the life of his family members as well as 183 other passengers on board a jet bound for Los Angeles. The story shifts back and forth, and it alternates between the time that they're all on the plane and in flight to the period after the crash when little Edward is hospitalized, and then when he goes off to live with his mother's sister's family. The story provides a great amount of compassion as well as how he learns to forge new connections to try and get him to survive himself through the tragedy. This book we recommend for fans of Celeste Ng as well as Ann Patchett. It is a very poignant, very gripping story. There are already holds on it, so if you're interested, I'd suggest you put your name on the list. The second book I'm going to discuss is called American Dirt, and it's by Janine Cummins. Publication date January 21st, and again, for this one, holds already exist. This novel is going to be big. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it is going to be one of the biggest of 2020. Already, it's getting so much buzz. And if you go on the author's website, on Janine Cummins' website, you'll see that she has planned all kinds of tours through all the different cities in the United States. So yeah, this is going to be a big one. So American Dirt is a timely and powerful portrait of the plight of the migrant. In the story, a young mother and her son desperately attempt to enter the United States illegally from Mexico because they are fleeing a drug cartel. So the beginning of the story, the first chapter, is really brutal.
Yeah, it is.
It's really brutal. It gets easier to read as you go on, but the tension itself never lets up. So it's really a page turner. I couldn't put it down. I just had to keep going to see what was going to happen. The American Dirt is an impeccably researched story, and it gives the narrative a very authentic feel. And it will tug at your heartstrings because it depicts the brutality and the horrors experienced by those migrants who are desperately searching for a better way of life. So if this sounds interesting, I would go and put my name on a reserve for this because it's really very well done, very well written, poignant story.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I agree. I started it and it was very intense.
Intense is a very good word for this.
And after like the first 2 chapters, I had to take a break because I knew it was going to be a challenging read because of the material.
Yes.
Not that it was gruesome or anything or like bloody necessarily. It just hits close to home.
Yeah.
But I think
it's not light.
Yeah. I think it will definitely resonate with many readers.
Yes. Okay.
So I have A Good Neighborhood by Therese Ann Fowler. It's coming out in February of 2020. So when you finish with Dear Edward and American Dirt, you have this one waiting for you. And it's by Therese Ann Fowler. She's best known for her novel Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald. And then that was published in 2013. And more recently, she published A Well-Behaved Woman, which came out last year around the same time. So this is a book for fans of Jodi Picoult. It's an emotional novel, and just like American Dirt and maybe Dear Edward, which I haven't read that one, but it stays with you after you finished reading it. Kirkus Review called it, quote, a riveting, potentially redemptive story of modern American suburbia that reads almost like an ancient Greek tragedy, unquote. So the story is basically about it's a complicated story, but it's two neighbors that share a property line. So you have the Whitmans and the Alston Holt family, and they live on opposite sides. And damage is done to an historic oak tree, which leads to legal proceedings. And while this is happening, the stepdaughter of the Whitmans sort of falls for the son of the other neighbor who's filing the suit about the damage to the oak tree. So you have multiple viewpoints in the story, and you have the question about life in America today and what does it mean to be a good neighbor. And I thought of Mr. Rogers, and definitely no Mr. Rogers in this particular book, but the question of how you live alongside with one another when you don't see eye to eye. And this also reminded me of Romeo and Juliet. It's a different type of story, but you have the star-crossed lovers, and you have the subject of class, race, and basically the nouveau riche versus maybe a middle income family. Educated, yes, but on opposite sides, literally, of the fence. It takes place in North Carolina, and it's present day. And you know from the onset that it's going to be a challenging read. It lives up to that expectation. The author manages to weave together multiple stories for these complicated characters, and it leaves the reader with a sense of vulnerability. You know, the things that happen in the book could really happen to anyone, given the situation. So the reader has an opportunity for catharsis, perhaps, as well as a call to action. So that's a good neighborhood. The second book I'm recommending is called I Want You to Know We Are Still Here, a memoir by Esther Safran Foer, and that comes out at the end of March 2020. And Esther Safran Foer is the mother of 3 best-selling authors, Franklin, Jonathan, and Joshua. She's a former president of the public relations firm FM Strategic Communications, and most recently served as the executive director of the synagogue 6th and I in Washington, D.C. Now, the author's parents came to the United States in 1949 and were the only members of her family to survive the Holocaust. She spent her earliest years in one of Germany's displaced person camps, where a number of refugees and concentration camp survivors were sent directly after World War II. So the book chronicles a shocking discovery, the author's mother's admission that her father had a family before the war, and that Esther had a surviving half-sister, or had a half-sister. And eventually this leads to Esther Safran Foer investigating the circumstances of what her mother has told her. So she does take a trip to Ukraine with one of her sons to look into this long-lost sibling. And all she has is a photograph and maybe a hand-drawn map to help her find who this person is. Her son's book, Everything Illuminated, which actually was turned into a movie, sparked by the family's reveal that the grandfather had a previous wife and a daughter in the Ukraine. So that book sort of relates to this memoir, but it's very uplifting story. Esther does take a trip to the Ukraine with her son, Franklin, and they do eventually uncover more of the secret family history, which I won't reveal because then that'll spoil the book for you. Foer has quoted that, while this is my story, my parents' story, each of my 3 sons and now my 6 grandchildren are important parts of this journey. We are 4 generations of survivors and survivors of survivors, storytellers and memory keepers, and we're still here. That's the title. And I think people will enjoy it. It's not maybe your typical Holocaust read. It did remind me a little bit of Dani Shapiro and her discovery of
I was thinking
her
that
background.
as you were talking about it.
When I first heard she's having this conversation with her mother, and the mother just, casually blurts out that her father had another family.
Mm-hmm.
So, but this is another heartfelt story, and I think people will find it intriguing and maybe can even relate to some of what the author shares with us. So that's it for this installment. Okay, now that the kids are quiet, so we hope that you will read one or all of these books, and if you enjoy them, let us know, and we'll be back.
We'll be back
With some more recommendations.
Happy holidays and happy
Happy
New
New
Year
Year.
to you guys.
Thank you.